Hello to everybody who's joined so far. I'm going to give it a few minutes before we start taking questions. See if more people will join. I see you figured it out, sis. Since you're the first one to join, do you have any questions? How do I feel about the momentum my books are creating? I'm enjoying it. They seem to be slowly trickling out as far as word of mouth, and I always appreciate that. Positive word of mouth is ultimately the best thing that I can take, considering where I'm at, and the more people it reaches, the more exciting it makes it for them, and the more motivated I become to keep going. So I'm happy with where it is. So, and I look forward to continuing to build it, because I have quite a few stories to tell still in Oz. I've got quite a few. You can't see it right now, but I have a storyboard that's right over here, pointing to where all the characters that I have currently are on the map and what stories are gonna come of it. So, yeah. Okay, just probably about 5 more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So, you could say that. I mean, I'll talk about it more during the actual Q&A, but I've got 3 more short stories coming out this year, and then the 4th book is already in production, and I'm already working on the idea for the 5th. Somewhere in there is the germ for a 6th, and that still doesn't even address all of the loose ends that I created in the first 3, so there's opportunity for more after that. So we'll see. I don't think a lot of current authors have really gone beyond maybe doing 3 or 4 books of their own for Oz, but I want to keep going as long as the fan base will have me. So, welcome Danny's Dollhouse. I'm just waiting on a few people to join, and then we will get started. Thanks for joining us. I have to admit that I'm a little nervous because I don't normally do this. This is the first time I've ever done a live chat, so I don't know what'll come of it, but I'm very happy to be doing it to engage with people that have been following me as long as they have. So, thank you for joining us. Beautiful Wicked Witchness. I like that username. That's great. I know if you guys can, I'll wait and show those off after I have more people show up. So. I realize that having this on a Friday afternoon is probably weird for some people. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are currently at work, but this will save in the archive, so if there's any added questions, I could always answer them on another one. My goal is to do a couple more of these as we get closer to another release, and even though the 4th Oz book is still a ways out from being released, there's a lot of other stuff that's going to be released in the meantime, and I'll talk a bit about that once we get started. So Couple more minutes. Boy, there's a lot of features on this. I've never done a live video before, so I'm kind of intrigued by this. So, oh, no, you don't want to see my dirty monitor. Our short story is going to be a regular thing for me, probably for the foreseeable future, because I've created a lot of odds and ends, morsels of stories in my writing based on events of the past and gaps between events that might be good as their own individual stories, but maybe not for a full-length book. So those are, I expect to be doing a few short stories, probably. I have ideas right now for about 5 or 6, in addition to the one that just came out today. So I think, yes. I mean, obviously, as I close in on the 4th Oz book, getting closer to becoming a product, I'll focus more of my attention on that. But in the meantime, the short stories are a good way to deal with little side stories that I wanted to tell. That was part of what motivated me to do this one, because I had some questions about my own writing. Namely, why was Toto absent from book 2 when he was such an active facet of the first one? Well, my idea was that he was probably sent off to go rest someplace a little more safe than the Emerald City, because after the attack of the Nightmare, probably a lot of people were too stressed to just stick around and find out what was coming next. And for some reason, some of them knew that something else was coming. And of course, they turned out to be right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done the 2nd and 3rd book. So, yeah, definitely, they'll be regular. They will be. But obviously, as we approach the release of a full-fledged book, I'll probably put them on the back burner for that window of time, and then pick them back up in between. They're good in between projects. At least that's what I've discovered. So, and I'll talk more about the 2nd one, which I've already started. So that one will hopefully be out this summer. So, so. I apologize, I keep taking drinks of water, but it's hot here in Oregon right now. We're in the upper 80s, lower 90s, which is kind of high for this time of year. Usually it's not like this in May. Usually you see this over in July and August, but not earlier. So hey sis, if you're hearing this, you should, if you're thinking about it, you should give Dad a call. See if he would, because he's on Instagram. Maybe he'll like to join us too. I mean, the more the merrier. I think Aaron is trying to get on too. Hi, Aaron. All right. What time is it? It is 2:10. Just a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. So, hope you're sitting in the air conditioning too, Aaron, because it's hot. My sister Tammy and Aaron, two of my biggest fans. So. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, Aaron, while we're waiting for more people to come on, do you have any questions? How do I come up with my ideas? Well, it helps that I've seen thousands of movies. So I've seen every idea done good and bad. And I sort of use what I've read as well from Oz as a good launch point in what kind of questions I create in my head that I want to answer. Because if you read the original stories, which are very much aimed at very young children, there's a lot of inconsistencies, continuity. I wouldn't say errors. I don't think that they were consciously errors. I think they were more just details that got left in the shuffle that didn't quite get considered. So, for instance, when L. Frank Baum wrote the first book, it was part of his story that people could be killed. There's a few deaths in the first book, as most people know if you've seen the movie. The Wicked Witch of the East and the West in particular, and then the Kalidas, which were in the book, they fell to their death in a pit. Well, you go 2 or 3 books later, and death doesn't exist in Oz all of a sudden. So I found that very weird. So how could you have both? You know, if people can't be killed in Oz according to how the later books interpret the realm, then who's to say that the people that were in the first one died, at least in my mind? So that was actually the launch point for the first book. How do we make that connotation that you can't die and yet supposedly some characters have died? So that was one of the questions that I wanted to answer. And then from there, just build the stories around them. So just come up with the question of why does a story need to exist and what does it imply? And the rest just kind of fall into place. And of course, I've always had a storytelling mind just because I used to write little short stories when I was a kid. So it's always just kind of come naturally to me. And again, seeing all the movies that I've seen and reading all the books that I read definitely help propel that. And every once in a while you'll find a morsel of an idea that you think is worth exploring, and then as you get into it, more things start revealing themselves, and pretty soon you're writing 3 books like I have done so far in this series. So okay. Well, we're 15 minutes in. While we're waiting for other people to join, and of course, if they don't, maybe it's because of the time of the day, I can at least talk about some of the stuff that I've got coming up for Oz. And then after this live chat, I will be putting up a few announcements as well. So There's also some questions that were submitted to me on Facebook that I will be answering as well. So, and then whoever doesn't get to tune in for this, the live video will be saved so they can go back and watch it later. So, what is it about Oz that's so near and dear to your heart? It reminds me of the happiest time of my life, and that is being a kid. Because almost all of my memories from when I was 9 or 10, which I would say are my golden years of memories, Oz, the Wizard of Oz, was a very big facet of it. Not just in home life, but also in school. I had a teacher who not only had us read the book, but watch the movie, and then afterwards we read books 2 and 3 as well. So when you're 9 and 10, those are formative years for you, as far as your personality, as far as your imagination, as far as you trying to figure out what interests you that could be turned into a professional aspiration. So it just kind of snuck in, Oz did, in that time of my life when my heart was aching for those opportunities. And so it's never really left me. It's stuck with me for most of my life. And the fact that there's so many books definitely helps, because when you're ready to revive interests after being away from it for a while, there's always a new book to read, it seems, especially now that we are in the age of public domain. What I'm doing, writing my own stories in Oz, is something that many others have done as well since the book started going into public domain. So there's quite a few books beyond the initial, what they consider canon. There's 43 that are considered canon, and then there's probably a good 50 or 60 high profile beyond that. So there's always a new story being told in Oz. And I kind of wanted a piece of that pie. I knew the time was right for me to write my own book after doing all the film reviews for so long. But it just seemed like a natural fit. So, okay. So, a couple of announcements first. So today is the release of The Green Delight, which is the first of the short stories. I announced this about a month ago. I've been writing it since February, I believe. It is about Toto, namely what he is doing in between books 1 and 2. So he's an active character in the first book, but you don't see him at all in the second. And there was a question that a lot of people had. And so when they were asking that question, they had the idea that, well, is he actually in the city? Maybe just not playing an active role. Maybe he's doing something. Well, I didn't think so, but as that question got asked, then I started asking myself, what is he doing? Because he's important. So I came up with this little yarn about him going to spend more time at the Green Delight, which is the farm of Henry and Emily. And they are... Oops, 1 second. All right. They are taking him under their wing and giving him an opportunity to rest in the aftermath of the attack of the nightmare. And while he's there, he encounters a few faces, some of them that are not familiar to him and some of them that are. The most notable of which is Bellina the Yellow Hen. She's one of the most popular characters in the original Bomb line. I've not found a good story to put her in until now, because being a chicken, and as capable as she is of getting caught up in adventure, the adventures in the 3 books so far have been quite tense, and I just could never somehow fit a hen into the idea of being an active player in some of the events that were going on in these books. You know, I mean, we just basically got through with a war on the Emerald City, and that's really no place for a hen. It's also no place for Toto. That's why he is not in books 2 and 3. But people wanted to know what happened to him, so that's where he's at. He's resting. He's taking a break from everything so that he can be in a place of solitude and relaxation, and there's characters that he encounters along the way. There's two other characters from the original Bomb line that are in this short story that I'm not quite ready to say right here because I would like people to read the short story first and let me know what they think. But suffice it to say, they were two characters that I really loved that were only seen in one book. So as a result, I decided to find a way to get them back in the story. Simultaneous to that, there is a new character, a horse, and I named him Baum. That's a tribute to L. Frank Baum. I have some ideas for what I want to do with him in a later installment, either a short story or a full-length novel. I haven't really decided yet, so it just all depends really on how the ideas flow and when I think is more dramatic and organic to the idea of a full story. It's possible, but remains to be seen. And of course, Emily and Henry are in the book as well. I liked the idea of doing a short story that was kind of innocent and not so tense, because the 3 books that I wrote tend to get a little serious. They tend to get very chaotic because there's a lot of action involved in what's going on in Oz. But Oz was not always that way with most of the people who wrote stories. It was very whimsical and it was just about joyous adventures. Well, there's been a need to in me to explore that again. So the short story was a good opportunity to write in a different tone, if that makes sense. So The Green Delight is out digitally today. It's only $1 for Amazon Kindle. It's going to come to Barnes & Noble Nook as well as Google Play Books here probably at the start of June. And then there's an additional physical release that I'm going to get into here in a minute. But first, I do have a couple more questions. What is it? Let's see. Oh, no, I answered that question. Sorry, sis, I already answered you. Okay, so let's go ahead and step into the next part of this, which is a lot of people have been asking about the A Nightmare in Oz audiobook, which we finally recorded this spring at Poison Frog Studio in Salem. The book is about halfway done. I spoke to my editor, Andy, who happens to be married to the man who is engineering and mixing. He had an emergency eye surgery a few weeks ago that took him away from being able to do any work on it. So we're only getting to about halfway at the moment. But he's doing a chapter, pretty much a chapter a day at the moment. Last discussion yesterday. And with us being halfway done, that means we'll probably be looking at having mixing and whatnot done by mid-June, I'm guessing. And then there's going to be a retake session for things that need to be redone. And then we're probably going to look at a release by July. That's what I'm hoping. I can't promise anything because, unfortunately, this phase of everything is out of my hands. But July is looking realistic to me at this moment, if that makes sense. Also to coincide with that, because when we were recording it and I was hearing it spoken out loud for the first time by my 2 actors, there were a lot of things that were in the original manuscript that I wanted to tweak or change. And unfortunately, there were also a couple of errors. No matter how many times you think that you've got a product perfected, occasionally you'll come across something that you know needs to be fixed. So, to coincide with the release of the audiobook, that same week I plan on reissuing A Nightmare in Oz in a expanded and revised 2nd edition. And this 2nd edition will also include The Green Delight. It's going to be incorporated into the back part of the book. So it'll actually be a package release. And for those of you who are wanting a physical edition of the first short story, because I didn't plan on releasing it by itself, this would be a good purchase to make, is the revised and expanded second edition of A Nightmare on Oz with the new edit as well as the short story. So I'm looking forward to that. And that'll come out, again, right around the same time that the audiobook is planned. So we're looking at a July, hopefully, release for that. July, that seems realistic. That seems realistic to my my editor as well as my sound engineer. So the progress on it's pretty good so far. So I'm happy to report that it's coming along. So, and I know you guys, a lot of you have waited on reading them because that's the method that you prefer, and who can blame you, because we live in a culture where we're always on a move, and sometimes reading takes a lot more time than we have to offer. Sometimes we need to be able to just listen to a book being read to us, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, I've done quite a bit of it myself when I'm always on the move, because I do work a lot outside of this career. So that covers the Green Delight, the A Nightmare on Oz audiobook, as well as the second edition. After that, targeted for an August release, is the second short story. The second short story is called Seedling, and it is a story that takes place from the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West at the moment that Dorothy arrives in Oz, and her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East, is killed. So, we really haven't seen, minus the movie, which is a different story entirely, but in the original story, you don't actually meet the Wicked Witch of the West until the time comes for Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion to go west into her fortress. I was always curious about what might have happened in her mind at that moment when this strange being that came out of a house in the sky arrived in Oz and murdered her sister with, you know, almost serendipitous precision, you know? So that idea spun off this second short story. So this one takes place simultaneous to the events of The Wizard of Oz. I've already started writing it. Like I said, I actually started a couple weeks ago, and it's going pretty well. I hope to have it done here probably in a couple weeks, and then it goes through 2 editing phases, not to mention the illustration phase. Jackson is committed to doing more illustrations. I'm keeping him busy because he's currently doing one more for the physical edition of The Green Delight. That will be exclusive to the physical print that comes out with A Nightmare on Oz second edition. Yeah, I'm liking this short story so far. It allows me not only to find out in my head what's going on in those moments in her mind, but also allows me to sort of expand on how this all relates to the stories I've already told. Because I've always was curious that there's so many other villains that I've dealt with in this story, including the Crooked Wizard and Mombi. Where were they at that instant that Dorothy came to Oz? What was their response? And I've also alluded to an order of wizards that were wicked that seemed to disappear as soon as she got there. Well, where did they go? Where are they now? And maybe there's something to be said about the Silent Menace from the second book, because Mombi brings him into the foray because he used to be part of the order and he no longer has a physical body. Well, maybe he was there when the Wicked Witch of the West decided her course of action to go after Dorothy. So those are the types of characters that you're going to be seeing. You're going to be seeing villains all gathered together in this second short story. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm confident that it's going to bring some much needed insight into villain motivations going forward, because I'm going to be dealing a lot with wizards in the absence of witches, because we've already dealt with the Wicked Witch of the West in her nightmare form. We've also dealt with Mombi, For those of you who haven't read book 3, yeah, that's the end of the line for Mombi, at least in my stories for right now. Yeah, it's gonna sort of create a new pool of villains for us to explore. So I'm kind of excited about it. So, so that's the plot of Seedling, and again, it'll probably be out in, the goal is August. So you've got the Green Delight now, and then in July, hopefully audiobook, and then expanded second edition of the first book. Then in August, you've got Seedling, the second short story, and then sometime in the fall will come the third, which is still too early to talk about the third because I don't even know all of what it entails. But the other big thing to talk about is book 4, because a lot of people have asked about it. I have a working title for it, but I'm not entirely sure that it's going to stick, so there won't be a title reveal at the moment. But what I can tell you is some of the stuff that's occurring plot-wise. The premise is, if you've actually read the third book, is that the Emerald City goes into lockdown after the events of the attack from the sky of the Fiastans. This new stranger who has come to the Emerald City claiming to be Ozma's long-lost brother has decided that the only way to protect the city is to shield it off from the outside world. And in doing so, he's also subjected the people who have decided to stay in the city to a host of mysteries that they have no outside help in solving. So, for instance, when a character just randomly disappears into the night, seems to be whisked up by a shadow and no one can explain it, when people like the wizard or Dorothy try to reach out and get insight from Glinda or Ozma, they can't. Because when the city is locked down, it seems to put up this magic barrier that they can't penetrate beyond. So what it does, it leaves them alone and isolated to solve the mystery. And there's a series of disappearances that are taking place that they can't really figure out where it's all coming from. But there is a common bond in them, is that as soon as they disappear, they leave a fragment of themselves behind. I'm not going to tell, it's not right yet to say who are the ones disappearing, but I can give you a couple of insights into who returns in this book. So at the end of the third book, I send a lot of the characters off into their own little story arcs. So Ambassador Kabumpo, the Hungry Tiger, and the Golden Gorilla have gone north to investigate the radio silence that's going on in Pompadour. That is ultimately going to lead to the plot of the fifth book. So they're not part of this. Simultaneously, the Silver Parrot, Sir Hocus, and Queen Anne have all gone back to Oogaboo, which is the kingdom in the northwest quadrant of Oz. What happens to them beyond this, I don't know. I haven't come up with an idea yet for them. Simultaneous to that, the Panther and the Leopard have gone back to their kingdom in the wilds in the south. Glinda has gone back to her palace as well in the south. Ozma has left the city. She hasn't really indicated where she's going. I know where she's going, but that'll be up to the reader to find out later on. So as a result, it's just the basic characters that have endured and stayed in the Emerald City during this time of turmoil, during this time of new leadership. But other people have shown up that were probably always part of the city, just weren't involved in the first 2 or 3 events. And those were Bungles the Glass Cat. So she is in this story. The Sawhorse is briefly in this story as well. I also decided to revive Eureka, the pink kitten. Mostly because if they're unraveling a mystery, a pink kitten who is really stealthy just seems like the perfect agent of espionage in a story like this. So That's why she's in it. And then there's a couple more that people will be excited about. There's also a lot of new ones. Um, Aside from King Oswald, he's also got uh, a guardian that watches over him named Darius. Um, and then there's a host of other mysterious soldiers that sort of hover over his court. Um, and then the masked instigator, who I brought briefly in book 3, will be back, and he plays an active role in the changing mood of the city, as well as Inspector Ozark, who was also in book 3 and is going to help with the course of solving the mysteries of the disappearances that occur. So that's in essence what you have in front of you as readers, as audience members, fellow Aussians who want to know what's going on in this specific series. So that is where we're at. And like I said, it doesn't just end with 2 or 3 short stories. I have ideas for a few. My goal is to get 4 done this year. Momentum seems to be pretty good with the second one. That'll be done soon. As far as writing in the 4th Oz book is concerned, I would say I'm probably 20% through it, and I'm comfortable with where it's at. There's some things that I have to deal with as far as where the story is at. Because when I create a story, I outline it. I outline it chapter by chapter, the singular events that are important. And as I progress in the actual writing of a story, I get to a point where I look forward and see if everything that comes after still makes narrative sense to what has already been written. Sometimes, absolutely. Other times, not so much. I did a lot of revising in the 3rd book because there were some parts of it that I didn't think were very dramatic. So as I got to a point in the story that I was happy with, I would look forward and I wouldn't like what I initially planned, and so I changed it. Sometimes that was for the better, sometimes that was for the worse. Book 3, I'm a bit conflicted on sometimes when I think about it, because not so much that I think it's an inferior book. I think it's a very good book, but it represents a time in my life that was very chaotic, not just personally but professionally, because I was in between jobs at a certain point. They were overwhelming me emotionally. And then I also was sick last spring, pretty scary time, and that took time away from me being able to be invested in the writing. So I definitely took a break from that. And as a result, I don't know if my focus changed, but my perspective on the 3rd story changed a lot. So as a result, it definitely altered the course of what the original intention was. Some of it that I worked with, I think, was pretty good. Other parts of it, not so much. But it is what it is. I mean, writing is a pretty big learning experience for an indie author like me. So what you do is, after you write a book, you go through and take it all back in and say, is this exactly what I intended it to be? What could I have done differently? What can I improve for the next outing? So each one has been a learning experience. As a result of where book 3 stands on in my heart, I feel like I've learned a lot more from that one than the other 2. A lot more that I'm going to apply for the next one. It's been a very good lesson professionally. So, got a couple more people who have joined. Hello all. Any chances we will see illustrations of the characters you are creating? Absolutely. We're working on the idea of doing a very specific style theme for book 4. We toyed with the idea of doing stained glass portraits of these characters. I don't know if I've convinced Jackson that that's exactly the way to go. He likes the idea of doing it, sort of staging it, since there's disappearances, as wanted posters. So we're still ironing that out. But right now he's busy with the short stories, because he's, like I said, he's got one more to do for the physical edition of the Green Delight, and then he's going to do 2, maybe 3 for Seedling. So he's definitely involved in that. But the characters that wind up showing up in book 4 and beyond, I don't have any intention of driving Jackson away. I think his aesthetic is absolutely perfect for this series. So he's gonna, as long as he wants to be employed with it, he's got a job with me. So let's see. And a couple people join. Feel free to ask anything you want, even stuff that's not related to my books specifically, because ultimately I am a fan of Oz, not just my own books, but the series as a whole. I think I've read, of the original Famous 40, I've read 36 or 37 of them. It's just the last couple I haven't quite read yet, which I might do this summer, just to say that I've been through the whole line. Alright. If I look down, it's because I'm taking notes on everything we talk about, just so that I can, talk about it in my posts as well. Okay. Now, someone on Facebook asked me what my favorite book is of the 3. Up till about 2 months ago, I said to myself, the first one was my favorite, just because I have a lot of emotional investment in it. I was so excited to be doing it. I was a new fiction writer, and the whole idea of it, the fact that I was able to do it and see it through to the end, was so... I was very much in a honeymoon phase after it came out. So up till then, the first book was my favorite. But as I've gone through and reread sections of them, I realized that the second one's probably the best. Yeah, and that would be The Black Rainbow of Oz. And it was actually the quickest to write as well. It only took me 6 months, because as soon as A Nightmare in Oz was done, I started planning this second one, and everything just seemed to fit so easily. It was like completing a puzzle in a very short amount of time. And so it required very little change as we progressed in the narrative. There was very little I had to go back and say, I need to do this a different way. This isn't exciting enough, or anything like that. So it was done in 6 months. I know it didn't come out until, I think it was May of 2021. Yeah. But I actually had principal writing on it done the previous October. So, and I started it that April, right after A Nightmare in Oz came out. So the book as a whole was done in 6 months. Illustration's a different story, because, Jackson also has a full-time job, just like me, outside of this gig. So the amount of time he was able to devote to it sometimes gets strained, and of course, when you have editors who also have full-time jobs outside of their editing gigs, you sort of depend on the right amount of time with everybody in order to make things fit. So when it comes to finishing a book, it's not technically ready to be released. You have all these additional facets: the editing, the post-production, the illustration, the design work. So sometimes it takes another 6 months for a book to come out. At least if you want to do it right. I mean, there are some authors that I have followed, some indie authors that I watch, and I'm amazed at the amount of output that they put out. Right after I finished Shadows Over Oz, I actually wrote another book called Blood Mountain, that it took me about 5.5, 6 months to complete as well. But it was very short. It was just my chance to do a little horror story. But while I was doing it, I was paying attention to a lot of indie authors who wrote horror. Some of them refer to their genre of choice as splatter crime, which tends to be pretty violent. But they churn it out so fast. I'm amazed by it. I really am. One of them that I follow, his name is Brian Barry, and I think he's released his second manuscript already this year. And then there's another one, Judith Sonnet, who releases novellas quite rapidly. I really marvel at the speed that people, when they put their mind to it, can release this type of stuff. Me, could I, if I didn't have a full-time job and a house to run, then it would be a different story. But when I do have the free time, I do spend it writing. Unfortunately, family has been very encouraging about it and understanding when I have to back out of an event because I'm getting visited by the muse and I have an idea that I have to pursue. So occasionally at family barbecues, I'll stop in the middle of them and say, I need to go write. And they usually just say, okay, no problem. We get it. Just because when I'm quiet, I'm always entertaining ideas about what to pursue in whatever story is present in my life. The fourth Oz book is definitely the focal point of everything right now, but not so much that I can't do these short stories. So those give me a good break as I'm still figuring out the plot of book 4. Book 5, I have the rough idea of what it's going to involve. Like I said, it's going to revolve around Ambassador Kabumpo, the elegant elephant, the hungry tiger, and the golden gorilla on their adventure up north to find out what's going on in the kingdom of Pumperdinck. It's not going to deal with any of the core princesses. They are the focus of this current book that I'm on. In particular, Princess Betsy, because Betsy was not a focal point of the first 3 books. I feel like I've shortchanged her, but it was all strategic because ultimately these new stories are about them coming of age, about the princesses no longer being girls, but adolescents who are forced to mature in a world that is requiring them to mature. Some people say that might conflict with the whole notion of the Oz books, which is just a series of adventures where people never age and never grow. Well, that was part of the reason why I did these books, because I didn't want to do the same thing. I wanted to progress the story in such a way that their roles change. They are forced to alter their behavior, their perspective, see things from a different light, and look at each other in a different light. And as they do, Oz itself also changes, because Oz is very much a country that gets its energy from the projections of its characters. So if these kids, Dorothy, Betsy, and Trot, are the types that think in eccentric ways, obviously that's been reflected in some of the adventures they've had, some of the kingdoms that they've gone into. But as they come of age and they start to mature, obviously the environment matures with them, because it's fed off the energy that they bring to it. So that's what's exciting to me about these stories ultimately, because it's about watching them grow up finally. Not grow up as into full-fledged adults, but as far as the behaviors and the attitudes that they've had up till now have been very innocent and pure and childlike. Well, sometimes that's fun, but it's not permanent. So that's what these stories have been about and will continue to be about. But book 5 is going to be a little bit of a departure, because I feel like I have spent so much time in the Emerald City, especially now with this 4th book taking place entirely in the Emerald City, that it's the idea of doing a story completely away from it fascinates me. And then for it to be about the supporting players being the main characters, that's really good. I like that idea. So that's what we're pursuing. All right, according to my time, it is 2:49. We didn't get very many questions beyond the ones that we already had, so Let me look here and see if there is a couple more on Facebook that I can answer. Oh, that's an interesting question. What do you have intended for the rascal? That's a good call out because he's only in the prologue of book 3. So if you've read the third book, you probably know what this guy's talking about. But if you haven't, I'm not going to reveal too much because here's what I'll say. The rascal, which is a character that was alluded to a little bit in one of the books and then actually came to be at the beginning of the third book, but then was not part of the primary plot. He will play a role in book 4. So if you guys are curious why I had that prologue in there and who he is, you're about to find out. That's where I'll leave it. Okay, I think we're going to conclude today's Q&A because I think that answered a few good questions and it gave you guys a perspective of where the story stands, what's coming up, and what the long-term goal is. So I appreciate everybody for joining today. I really do. We'll do this again here probably in a month or two. Probably right around the time that the audiobook and the second edition of A Nightmare in Oz are ready to come out, I'll hold another live Q&A. Alrighty? And I appreciate those who have shown up and those who weren't able to join us. I hope that when you go back and watch the video, it's informative for you. Alrighty? I appreciate it very much, and I'll see you over the rainbow.